Hello, welcome to Mike's Mets Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pashota. Happy Sunday to you, and Happy New Year's Eve to you. So the reason for this episode is just to sort of recap everything that we've gone through this year and go over what the Mets off-season plans have been like. It's been a underwhelming, let's say, but unsurprising last month of the year for 2023. And before we go into everything, I just wanted to quickly say thank you for everybody who has subscribed and listened and taken the time to listen to this podcast. I've really enjoyed it. I wish I've had more to say about what we've been going through and um, more happier news to report. It's been somewhat of a disappointing first season to kind of start this podcast with. Kind of wish I had more to talk about, but unfortunately, there just hasn't been a lot to report, and that's mostly what I wanted to do was report the important things. So the only episode I've recorded really since the off season has been the Luis Severino signing, and the other one was the Carlos Martinez being signed as manager. And that's really been the only major news for the Mets the last couple months. It's uh, reported alongside all of that has been these sort of like minor reports, and I didn't bother doing episodes about all of them because they're so small. There's a lot of minor league deals, a lot of 1 year deals being signed. So rather than just do like in an individual podcast episode about one Mets, like signing uh, about one like reliever that we'll go into. I figured I'd just kind of like recap it all into one episode, and what better way to do it than the last day of the year. So we are going to first talk about the first, which was, I guess you can say, is the biggest trade thus far for the Mets. And again, this hasn't been a very sexy um, off season for the Mets. Not like last year where it was just like, oh, the Mets did this. Oh, the Mets did this. There's been no major signings. The Pete Alonso contract negotiations remain unclear as to what exactly is going to happen. We don't think a deal is going to be done anytime soon, if there is done at all. And we're still kind of waiting to see how that all kind of plays out. Um, so there hasn't been anything on that front, and then obviously the negotiations with um, Yamamoto have gone nowhere. Obviously there was no news to report on the Shohei Ohtani signing, and it's clear the Los Angeles Dodgers. And let me be very clear: I hope the Dodgers have the Mets kind of luck like what they had last year. It won't happen. I know that for sure. The Dodgers are going to have a great year. They're probably going to win 118 games. We'll see how many they do win, but it's probably going to be a good, not great year for the Los Angeles Dodgers. That would be my guess. I think they're going to do really well. I think they're going to underperform in the offseason as they always do, and that's just going to be the kind of the way they go. That's just been the Dodgers' MO the last couple of years, and I'm expecting sort of the same thing happening this year. Uh, the Dodgers signed which was first like the Otani signing, which was just like a complete fu to everybody. It was just like, yeah, uh, I wish we had that option to defer a lot of our contract money. I guess we do have the option. It just never really happens, and the way they did it with like the preeminent free agent signing of the year did rub a lot of people the wrong way. It was just like, oh, okay, well, obviously, like you could defer all of our payments for 10 years from now and pay this guy $680 million over 10 years for however many years. But it didn't really like jump into anyone's mind that that was an option. Yamamoto signing is just a one of those things that was everyone was like, he's not going to come play for New York, even though he was being teased that the Yankees and the Mets were going to be involved in negotiations. It was pretty clear that his interests were going towards LA and remaining on the West Coast because it's generally where every pitcher who pitches for Japan is usually interested, and with very few exceptions. In this case, most recently with Kodai Senga and Masahiro Tanaka, these were just a couple of options where the Mets and Yankees were, the the more interested party. But generally, everyone's going to the West Coast in the United States from Japan. So I'm not gonna dwell too much on that, other than to say, I hope the Dodgers, like take a bath with razor blades. That's just like my general opinion. I've never really hated the Dodgers that much. My opinion was just like they're a great franchise, great job for them. This offseason, I'm just like, just completely f off. I'm so sick of it because they just won the offseason. They just make the Glass no trade, and then like, oh, we're gonna sign Shohei Ohtani, and then, oh, we're also gonna sign Yamamoto. And do you want to, like, bring Ken Griffey Jr. out of retirement and like sign him to like a literally a 1 year deal, maybe? Also, like, is that what you do? Anyway, I'm not gonna dwell too much on it. I'm just to say I'm still very annoyed about the whole thing, how the whole thing has progressed, and that the Mets had the option, obviously, and they were very close to signing Yamamoto, but his interests were obviously just jack up the price from the Dodgers by using the Mets as a negotiation tool, and he did great. I certainly don't hope anything bad happens to Yamamoto. He's a great pitcher. The possibility certainly exists, and I wouldn't be too bummed out if maybe things don't go well for Yamamoto and the Dodgers, but um, hoping that would be probably unlikely. So anyway, back to the Mets and their underwhelming moves this offseason. So it's been the one major move you could say that they've done, and again, not that much, has been the trade with the Milwaukee Brewers. Gasp. David Stern's interested in making a trade with his old organization because he knows the players. Weird. But yeah, so he makes a very minor trade here and acquires Adrian Hauser, starting pitcher, and Tyrone Taylor, veteran outfielder. And this is really just to shore up the bench and shore up the back of that starting rotation, which is still kind of a mess. The Mets need, obviously, to continue making moves to kind of fill out the bench and fill out the starting rotation. The Adrian Hauser signing, the guy's solid. He just hasn't really pitched that much. He's basically been used by the Brewers as a sixth starter, and would kind of float in between the bullpen and the starting rotation. Nothing too drastic with him, other than to say that I think that he's a solid enough pitcher over his career as a 4 ERA. Um, 539 innings pitched. He's struck out 439 against 212 walks. What's that say? He doesn't really strike out that many guys, and his control is decent, not great. He limits home runs somewhat, but not that much. The guy's just a typical fifth starter, and you're not really going to hang that much on the trade for Adrian Hauser. I think if he's healthy, he'll be solid enough for them, but there's really nothing to say that much about it. Tyrone Taylor, same thing. This is a guy who is probably not going to be making the Mets starting lineup, but if perchance he does find his way into it, he'll be decent enough. Taylor has had a reasonable amount of success, but nothing really that major. He has, for his career, has 41 career home runs in over 331 career games. He has a career 746 OPS and a career WAR of 4.5. So he's a guy who's going to maybe hit a few home runs, and you can stick in there in an emergency if you really need to give a guy a rest. He can play all the outfield positions, and he has. And he plays them at a decent enough level, I would say. He's nothing really that spectacular, but I think he plays all three outfield positions decently. So the guy's a prototypical fourth outfielder, a guy who you can feel comfortable slotting in every 7 games as a starter. But he's probably not going to see that much playing time. But when he is playing, they can be decently happy with what he's probably going to give them. So for that trade, the Mets just had to sacrifice a minor leaguer, Coleman Crowe, and Coleman Crowe not a huge prospect for the Mets. So I think they feel pretty decent about that whole trade going for them. It does two things: it just fills out a spot in their bench, and it fills in a spot in their starting rotation. So nothing that major, but it was something to be done. And while the Mets were still talking to Yamamoto and still trying to work out a deal with him. It was an important trade that needed to be done. So good job there. A solid B for a trade by David Stearns. The other moves are not going to be nearly as interesting, and I made the conscious choice to completely remove what we were talking. The minor league deals, the waiver signing, all these things that were done. These are just very. These are moves that are probably not going to end up factoring in too much into the team's starting lineup for 2024 or their starting rotation or even the 40-man roster. So there were some trades for veterans, a couple former All-Stars in there, but there's really nothing that major. The actual major league signings, these are the guys that we're expecting are probably going to be making the team and are going to be factoring in much more majorly into spring training, are the following. So first, Joey Wendell. Joey Wendell, veteran infielder. So most of his time with Tampa Bay, that's probably where people would know the name Joey Wendell from. Other people would probably know him as playing for the Marlins the last 2 years. Not well. He's had two pretty disastrous years with Miami and didn't really factor in at all to the playoff run the Marlins made last year. So what are the actual qualifications here? Well, he's a former All-Star. He made the All-Star team in 2021, and that was really kind of like the apex of his value, where people saw him as, oh, well, this guy can actually hit like a decent amount, and was flashing a little bit more power than he did in most years. He hit 11 home runs in 2021. Was a little bit out of left field, and 31 doubles. The guy's a decent enough power, decent enough bat, like off the bench, and that's probably what we're expecting. Is that Joey Wendell's going to be mostly going to be playing off the bench. It's unlikely he's starting at third base. I would say that's probably going to go Joey Wendell, even though Wendell can play. I'm sorry, to Brett Beatty, even though Wendell can play third base. What we're probably going to see of Joey Wendell is him taking Luis Guillorme's spot. Guillorme now departed for free agency, and we're going to expect him to Wendell sort of fill into this utility infielder, guy who can play second, third, or short in a pinch. And if there's nothing else to say about Wendell's offensive game, his defensive game is actually excellent. He's still considered a very good defensive infielder, even now into his 30s. The range subsided a little bit, but the guy's very slick in the field. And as I said, can play all three infield positions, so a useful player off the bench. And if he can regain even somewhat his offensive value, it's going to be a good under-the-radar signing for the Mets, but one they're not really going to hang too much on if it doesn't go that well. So Joey Wendell was that signing. The other ones are going to be all involved in the Mets bullpen, and the bullpen obviously had its issues. David Stearns was clearly focused on finding value, and Stearns has the reputation of finding value. He has found guys who didn't seem like they were going to be majorly successful, and found them to be actually, oh, well, this guy, had he just done this and done this and then this, could have had a much better career. And there's been a lot of Milwaukee reclamation projects over the years that Stearns has gotten a lot of credit for. In terms of just acquiring and finding that player and putting him into the Milwaukee organization and then coaching him up. So, particularly with pitchers, so he focused on 4 relievers, all veterans, and those relievers were Austin Adams, Michael Tonkin, Jorge Lopez, and Yohan Ramirez. The last one, Ramirez, was a trade made from the Chicago White Sox. Yohan Ramirez is a righty. He's had a decent amount of success, and Ramirez is probably the one that they're most interested in. He doesn't strike out a lot of guys. 9.3 strikeouts against 5 innings, against 5 walks per 9 innings. So decent enough stuff, but control clearly a factor. Was having a pretty decent year in Pittsburgh last year in 2023 before he was traded to the White Sox, and then from there he didn't really see much time. So Mets made the trade. It was just for cash considerations. So Yohan Ramirez will likely be a member of the Mets bullpen, or at least be in the bullpen selection group. We'll see how far he progresses, but Ramirez is one option that Mets have now brought in to sort of shore up that middle relief. The other ones, Jorge Lopez, and Jorge Lopez, the Mets signed to a 1-year, $2 million deal. And this is just like one of those things that are like baseball is like funny that you can be like terrible at your job and still make $2 million a year. It's just the way that the league is structured, that salaries are structured. But Lopez has been pitching in the league for it's got to be like almost 10 years now. Yeah, he debuted in 2015 with Milwaukee back in the day, and has mostly seen time in the American League, and none of it successful. He has for his career a 5.51 ERA, negative 0.4 WAR for his career. He's 22 wins, 40 losses. He is not what you would consider a good player. This is basically just a fill the roster type deal, and what if anything Stearns sees in signing Jorge Lopez, unclear. My guess would be this is just we need a veteran who can kind of fill the spot, and he doesn't do really anything well. He's just a guy. He's just a guy who's a veteran pitcher, and I would doubt he has any success. If he does, it's going to be very minor. You're probably going to see a lot more of just like, oh god, this guy is terrible, more than like, wow, that was a surprising signing. That'd be my prediction for Jorge Lopez thus far. So I won't dwell too much on Jorge Lopez, other than to say that he was improbably an all-star in 2022, and that's basically what they're going for. It's what they're hoping for, but largely it has been a very unsuccessful career for Jorge Lopez. He's like flashed this like really surprising first half of 2022 all-star season with Baltimore. That was like very much like just like an outlier of a very like mediocre to bad career. So I'm not really expecting anything from Jorge Lopez other than probably like a lot of headaches. So Jorge Lopez gone. The other two signings were Austin Adams, who notably didn't really pitch that much in 2023. He was out for almost the entire year with an injury, and that was back-to-back years. So this is like a very under the radar like value signing that they're hoping for with Austin Adams, who had flashed a lot of like success early on in his career, had great stuff, was striking out a lot of guys. Unfortunately, has also walked a lot of guys. He has a pretty atrocious walk rate, 5.9 walks per 9 innings for his career. 13.4 strikeouts per 9 innings for his career also. So if this guy is on his game, he can be pretty devastating just in terms of striking guys out. I don't like wild relievers. I generally view them as kind of like a waste of time. Like they don't really show any value, if any. So it's just sort of, can you teach this kid some control? And he's coming off, as I said, back-to-back years where he's had a season-ending injury. So he's only pitched in total. He's pitched in total fewer than 20 innings over the last two seasons. So he's had back-to-back major injuries. We'll see how that like plays into it. I don't know if we can expect him to be a major factor. It remains to be seen. My guess would be that Austin Adams is going to have his shot in spring training, and if he's at all successful, he might see some time with the Mets opening rotation. But if he's going back to his ways or he gets hurt again, it's just going to be kind of what we expect. The last signing was kind of an under-the-radar one, and they had signed Michael Tonkin to a 1-year, $1 million deal. And Tonkin was something of like a reclamation project for the Atlanta Braves last year. Tonkin had seen no time in the major leagues for about 6 years until last year, and he had spent time in the minors. He had spent time in the independent leagues with he made a couple appearances with the Long Island Ducks, so he's familiar with New York. But he signed a minor league deal with the Atlanta Braves, improbably made the team, was called up, and just spent most of the year in middle relief for the Braves. Did nothing really that well. He was just a decent enough arm in that Atlanta bullpen, but saw a lot of time and impressed enough people that people were like, oh, like that guy, like pretty decent. After what was a fairly underwhelming career in Minnesota for about like 4 years. but came to Atlanta and did a decent enough job. So it would seem he's probably the most likely to stick around for the Mets bullpen, just because he's had the most success out of any of the Mets relievers recently, particularly in 2023. So we'll see how that goes. So what we have here in totality is a lot of value signings. These are moves that are not going to really move the needle that much. It's basically just to kind of fill out the rotation and fill out the bullpen. And uh, none of this would be deemed sexy. I would say nothing that the Mets have done thus far is really newsworthy. That's why I haven't done any podcast episodes about it. The only thing that's newsworthy has been their pursuit of free agents that have ultimately not signed with the Mets. What's also been being reported is the Mets' interest in trying to potentially acquire some pitchers. One option has been Blake Snell. The other one has been the Japanese pitcher not named Yamamoto, and that would be Imanaga. And there's obviously like the most attention was paid to Yamamoto, who was like a once in a generation type of player in Japan. Um, Imanaga a little bit closer to like Kodai Senga, just in terms of like a really good, talented veteran starting pitcher, who's not as young as Yamamoto. So there's obviously the risk goes up even higher. But certainly he is someone to keep interested in. The Red Sox have also been interested in potentially acquiring him, so they've been connected to him as well. Then there's the reigning NL Cy Young winner Blake Snell, who the Mets have also been connected to in terms of trying to potentially acquire. They've shown interest in acquiring third baseman Gio Urshela, and also veteran DH JD Martinez. So these are just the rumors that have been swirling about the Mets potentially acquiring, and the focus has been they need to acquire a DH, another outfielder maybe, and another starting rotation piece. One who can factor in at the top of the Mets rotation, along with Kodai Senga. And bringing in Iwanaga would be interesting. I can't say it's a like super like bringing in like Yamamoto move type move or acquiring Blake Snell. Snell is a very polarizing player in that he's won 2 Cy Young awards, yet is considered not probably one of the top 10 pitchers in baseball. It's just because in between those Cy Young awards, like there's just been a lot of mediocre and injury plagued performances. So he's a really interesting and potentially very damaging player if the Mets choose to acquire him. He would acquire, and it would mean like a sizable investment. A guy who's won 2 Cy Young awards, you're going to be putting in a lot of money. At least probably $200 million to acquire that type of starting pitcher. And he's a frontline starter. There's no doubt about it. He's also a very polarizing figure. And we'll see if the Mets do ultimately end up pursuing Blake Snell. So that covers what the Mets have done, what they are maybe potentially going to be doing for January. And we'll see if the Mets end up pursuing anything in that regard. But I certainly do not think the Mets offseason is done by any stretch. But what we've seen so far is just mainly value signings, under the radar signings. There's nothing that's really kind of piqued the news thus far with the Mets, and they've been keeping it pretty quiet, other than obviously their pursuit of Yamamoto. But here's hoping that there is more to talk about. I certainly would like to record more. And if the Mets can do some more, that would be helpful for everybody, I think, in that regard. So here's hoping that we have something more to talk about other than just more value signings in this offseason. Thank you for listening to Mike Smith's podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike Smith's Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.